In this video we will talk about the atomic bombing of USA on Japan and the reasons behind it. So watch till the end to know the whole story. Also, if you're new to our channel, then don't forget to subscribe to us. Let's get started without further ado. The scientists working on the initiative spent the ensuing years creating the essential components for nuclear fusion, including plutonium, Pu-239, and uranium-235. They shipped them to Los Alamos, New Mexico, where a group directed by J. Robert Oppenheimer attempted to create an atomic bomb from these components at the Trinity test site in Alamogordo, New Mexico. The Manhattan Project conducted its first successful test of an atomic explosive early on July 16, 1945. It was a plutonium bomb. By the time of the Trinity test, Germany had been vanquished in Europe by the Allied powers. Even though it was obvious, as early as 1944, that Japan had little prospect of prevailing, they swore to fight to the final end in the Pacific. In fact, from mid-April 1945, when President Harry Truman took office, to mid-July, Japanese forces killed and maimed more allies than they had in the entire 3 years of the Pacific War combined, demonstrating that Japan had grown even more dangerous when it was in the clear. The militarist government of Japan rejected the Potsdam Declaration's call for capitulation, which threatened the Japanese with prompt and utter destruction if they refused. General Douglas MacArthur and other prominent military leaders advocated extending the current conventional bombardment of Japan and then launching a large invasion known as Operation Downfall. They warned Truman that such an invasion may cause up to 1 million American casualties. Despite the moral objections of General Dwight Eisenhower, Secretary of War Henry Stimson, and a few Manhattan Project scientists, Truman decided to deploy the atomic bomb in the hopes of hastening the conclusion of the war. The A-bomb's supporters, like James Byrnes, Truman's Secretary of State, believed that its deadly force would not only finish the war but also place the United States in a powerful position to shape the post-war world. It was the first nuclear weapon to be used in a war and exploded with an energy equivalent to about 15 kilotons of TNT. The conventional thinking, particularly in the US, holds that dropping the bomb on Japan was important to hasten the end of the war and preserve lives. Even today, a lot of individuals firmly believe that the bomb was required to force the Japanese to submit and avert a US invasion of Japan that may have resulted in the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives. However, in-depth scholarly research conducted in the US utilizing original historical documents demonstrates that this simply was not the case. Japan was prepared to give up by the time the bomb was ready for use. It wasn't necessary to hit them with that dreadful thing because, as General Dwight Eisenhower noted, Japan was already looking for a method to surrender while suffering the least amount of public humiliation. So why were Hiroshima and Nagasaki hit by atomic bombs if Japan was prepared to submit? The US's ambition to continue to dominate the region after the war was a major consideration in the decision to bomb. The US had to occupy Japan in order for it to create a permanent military presence, control its political and economic system, and rule the Pacific region without worrying about a Japanese comeback, according to those who were planning for the post-war situation. However, the US no longer saw Japanese recovery as its top strategic concern. Instead, it was more worried about the Soviet Union's post-war activities in Asia and Europe. The US had the Soviet Union as an ally in the battle against Germany. Naturally, both economic systems were incompatible in the end. The US would not accept that any aspect of the global economy be closed to it, and those looking for a rival to the market economic model of the US tended to look to the Soviet Union. This looming hostility was made worse by the Soviet Union's rising might and prestige as a result of its part in bringing down Germany's military apparatus. Therefore, the US wanted to stop any Soviet advances in Asia and any eventual Soviet influence over Japan. One is compelled to draw the conclusion that the US sought to highlight its superior military capability, namely, its possession of the atomic bomb, in order to obtain an advantage over the Soviet Union in the post-war settlement of both Asia and Europe. As noted by American historian Gar Alperovitz, recent studies have shown conclusively that from April 1945 on, senior American officials believed that unleashing the atomic bomb would significantly strengthen US diplomacy against the Soviet Union in negotiations over both post-war Europe and Asia. Truman was first made aware of the atomic bomb because of its potential effects on diplomacy rather than how it related to the fight against Japan, despite the fact that many prominent US politicians, diplomats, and military leaders believed that bombing Japan was unnecessary. The group that was around the country's president at the time, Harry S. Truman, pushed hard for it. The atom bomb, for instance, was referred to as the MasterCard in US diplomacy with the Soviet Union by Secretary of War Henry Stimson. Early in 1945, it became evident that, despite not requesting an unconditional surrender, the Japanese leadership was seeking a negotiated surrender through the Soviet Union, which was acting as a neutral third party. Its prerequisite was that Hirohito, the Japanese emperor, would retain his post without suffering public humiliation. He might have taken on the role of a constitutional king and been protected from war crimes accusations, which could have resulted in his execution, as they did for many Nazi commanders. Although most Western leaders agreed that this would be a good strategy, the Japanese government was not informed of this consensus. Records show that President Truman intentionally left this out of the Potsdam Declaration, the post-war agreement that the great powers, the wartime coalition of the US, UK, and Soviet Union, strove to reach, because the USA bomb test at Alamogordo had just been successfully completed. Because it required a reason to use the bomb to show off its immense might in a world where only the US possessed it, the US leadership chose not to inform the Japanese that their surrender terms were largely acceptable. Only before the Japanese capitulated did it have the chance to do so. 3 months after the end of the war in Europe, the Soviet Union promised it would start a war against Japan. The US had 2 reasons for wanting to use the bomb before that happened, including the fact that the day was drawing near. First off, there was no excuse for unleashing the atomic bomb because it was almost certain that the Soviet Union's involvement in the conflict would result in a Japanese surrender. Second, the US wanted to rule out the chance that the Soviet Union might invade Japan while US forces were still far away, therefore increasing Soviet might. So, on August 6, 1945, the US launched the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. As promised, on August 9, the Soviet Union joined the conflict in Asia. The US launched a second bomb on the city of Nagasaki later that day, before Japan had time to comprehend and react to the horrifying effects of the Hiroshima bomb. The US administration achieved its goals, but at the most horrific human cost. Since 1945, every generation has had to live with the memory of these atrocities and the dread that they will be repeated using considerably more potent and lethal weapons. Let us recommit to the global abolition of nuclear weapons, to a world of peace and justice, in these most perilous times, as we commemorate Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those who died, and those, the hibakusha, who survived and bore testimony. This is it for today's video. Let us know about your opinions in the comments section below and click that subscribe and bell icon for future notifications. Thanks for watching.